Glad to have y'all here tonight in prayer meeting. Timothy said, boy, I am so glad. He said, we've had picnics, we've had ball games. I am just glad we're having plain old church tonight. That's what little Timothy said. And so I am too. I'm glad we're just having plain old church tonight too. Hey, take your Bibles this evening, turn to Psalm chapter 95. Psalm chapter 95 is where I'm going to speak from tonight, and a little background of what has led me to where I am ever since January. In January, I began to think, well, it's a new year. I'm the new minister here. You know, what are those things that we need to build into our life to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ? What is it important that we give attention to if we want to grow in our relationship with Jesus? And so, not to say everything I've said for the past 8 months, but what I've tried to do is kind of follow a path, and I know it may not have been very clear at some points along the way, but I began in January with several weeks talking about, you know, we need to be in our Bibles, and I use the illustration of a hand, and there's 5 fingers, and so those correspond with how we can get more out of our Bibles. We should hear the Bible. We should read the Bible. We should study the Bible. And if you remember what I said the difference in reading the Bible and studying the Bible is a piece of paper and a pencil. And then I said also we've got to memorize scriptures, and then we've got to meditate on scriptures. And you might remember also a little acronym called SPEC. You read the Bible or you're studying the Bible, and as you're reading through the scriptures, you think of this acronym SPEC. Is there a sin to confess? Is there a promise to claim? Is there an example to follow? Is there a command to obey? Is there knowledge to be gained? But that's just, so I started with the Bible, how to get more out of the Bible. And then I moved from there into prayer. If we're going to be growing Christians, we got to be Christians who are going deeper in the Bible and who are going deeper in prayer. And then I moved from that, and for a long time we talked about evangelism because if we're going to be good Christians, we've got to be able to share our faith. And I used the acronym APPLE. And I focused on relationships and leveraging relationships as a way to share the gospel. And so you remember what APPLE stands for. Well, tonight I'm coming to a fourth component of what it means to be a Christian that is going deeper with the Lord, and it's worship. Worship from Psalm chapter 95 is where I want to, and it may seem like a no-brainer, but it's not. Goodness, when I was pastor at West End, had this man who had begun coming to the church and became very involved, and he was something of a self-appointed minister, and he made an appointment with me and said, I want to come and talk to you about the way that you're pastoring. And so he came and he sat down in the office and he said, now what I think you ought to be doing is, I think you ought to take everybody in the church and start meeting with them one-on-one individually. And he said, now if you're going to start meeting with everybody one-on-one individually, that means you got to cut some things out that you're doing, and you got to let some things go. And he said, the first thing I would let go if I were you is the Sunday morning worship service. And I said, well, we may not do anything else around here, but one thing we'll always do is the Sunday morning worship service. So Psalm chapter 95. Psalm chapter 95. I want you to listen to this. Worship. I'm going to read the first 7 verses right into verse number 8. Think about worship. And think of this. Verse number 1 speaks of the what of worship. Like, what are we supposed to be doing when we come together? It says, Psalm chapter 95, verse 1, it says, oh, come. And listen, I love that we offer our services online for anyone to view from anywhere at any time. That's necessary and needful. And there are many reasons why people cannot come to church. And I understand those reasons beyond just physical reasons. But if we can come to church, we should come to church. It says, oh, come. Then it says, let us sing to the Lord. And so what are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be coming together and assembling ourselves as Christians. And then we're supposed to be singing when we come to church. Do you sing? We need to be singing. John Wesley said, our faith is not only a saving faith, but it's also a singing faith. I can't sing. Remember that Wednesday night when Jerome and I, we swapped roles and he conducted the Bible study and I led the singing? It sounded like a half-dead cow up there, didn't it? Yes, Miss Pat says yes. Yes, it did, Miss Pat says. Well, that's in the next verse. That's in the next verse. You're exactly right. It says, oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. It says right there in verse 1, it says, let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. By the way, the word for noise, some translations say, let us shout. The New King James says, let us shout joyfully. The New International Version also uses the word not noise, but the word shout, because the word that is translated as noise, it literally means a sound that splits the ear. And so, oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a sound that splits the ear to the rock of our salvation. Now, most Baptist churches, we're never going to get anywhere close to doing that, are we? We're just simply not going to do it. Did you hear about that fellow that lived down County Road 151? I talked about him on Sunday morning, you might remember. He and his wife, on Sunday, they went to the fair. And they rode the merry-go-round, okay? Well, listen, where they've been since then is they've been up to Gatlinburg. They finally got enough gas money to get up to Gatlinburg, and one of those airplanes, take people up and take them on a little spin. Well, of course, this old fella and his wife, they'd never been up in one of those things, and he looked at that and said, you know what? We just got to do it. But of course, they don't have any money. And so he came to the pilot and he said, you know what? All I've got enough is just for one ticket. But me and the wife, we've always wanted to go up. Is there any way you can let us on two for the price of one? And the airline pilot said, you know what? I think I might just be able to cut a deal with you. Here's the deal. If I take you and the missus up there, and if I don't hear a peep out of you, not a squeal, not a scream, nothing, on the whole trip, when we land, it's free for both of you. But if I hear anything come out of either one of your mouths, you owe me for 2 plane rides. He said, absolutely, we'll tape her mouth shut. I'll be just fine. We'll do okay. Well, they get in the back of that plane. They go up there. Well, this guy, he's going to get his money. So he's doing crazy eights. He flips that plane upside down, flies upside down for a while. He puts the thing in a tailspin. He goes straight down, comes straight up. He doesn't hear a single thing out of the back. Finally, as they're landing, he turns around and says, well, old man, looks like you got yourself a free ride. I tried everything I could think of to get you to scream, but I couldn't get a single thing out of you. How did you do it? He said, well, it was awfully hard. I almost did let out a scream when the missus fell out. Well, but look at Psalm 95, verse 1. Look what makes the psalmist shout joyfully. The rock of our salvation. Like when he thought about the phrase, Jesus saves. When he thought about salvation, that's what made him want to shout. And so verse number 1 just kind of says, well, this is actually what, I'm not saying we ought to act like a bunch of kooks. But there's nothing wrong with expression in worship. God has made us to be emotional people, and there is an avenue by which we should be able to express our emotions in worship. So he says we come together and we sing and we shout joyfully because Jesus is our salvation. Verse 2 says how we're supposed to do it. It says, let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. We're supposed to come with a thankful heart. It says, let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. And so how we worship is with thanksgiving and with praise. Then verse number 3 tells us why we're supposed to worship. Verse 3 says, for the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. Notice verse 4 and 5. In his hand are the depths of the earth. In other words, he carved out the Grand Canyon. The heights of the mountains are his also. He scooped up the Rocky Mountains. Verse 5, the sea is his, for he made it. 70% of the earth is covered with water. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. And so we worship God because he is king and because he is creator. And verse number 6 then says, oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. He made us. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Verse number 7, for he is our God, and we're the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. He is our shepherd. You can't see this stained glass window. Some of y'all have never seen it. So when we dismiss here, some of y'all need to go and see the one stained glass window that you've never seen. You've seen the ones in the sanctuary. You may have seen the Lord's Supper stained glass window in the hallway. But back here in what used to be Brother Chuck Bass's office, used to be the pastor's office, is a stained glass window of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. I love it. I can imagine Brother Chuck sitting in there praying for you, preparing messages for you, looking at that stained glass window of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. It says, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. I love the metaphor of Jesus as the shepherd. And I thought long and hard on that. I don't even know a shepherd. You don't know a shepherd. You might know someone who has some sheep, but I bet the same guy's got a bunch of goats out in the field too, and junk cars too, probably. Why? Why is it that for 2,000 years this metaphor of God as shepherd is still so powerful? By the way, I heard one preacher say, got to quit using that metaphor. It's obsolete, outdated. It doesn't communicate anymore. We ought to talk about God as our CEO or something like that. He uses these other more modern examples as if the Bible needed to have an upgrade. The shepherd's good. Because I think even though I don't even know a shepherd, and you've never met a shepherd, all of us understand that we need somebody who is bigger than we are, who is wiser than we are, who is more powerful than we are, who is going to be able to take care of us. And that's what the shepherd is. And so he says we worship him because he's God, because he's king, because he's creator, because he's maker. We worship him because he is shepherd. And then it says in verse 7, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. In other words, worship requires a response on our behalf. Well, that's the scripture I want to use as the background. I want to talk about worship probably for about 2 Wednesday nights, okay? But when we think about worship, when we come together on Sundays and on Wednesdays, but most especially I have in mind the Sunday morning corporate gathering, when we come together on Sunday mornings, we are here for an event in which God is the guest of honor. But we don't act that way most Sundays. We don't think about that when we come to church on Sundays. In fact, here's what I'm guilty of this. Probably some of you are too. One of my earliest memories, I was probably 6 years old. I could have been 5, but I might have been 6 years old. But my brother, who's 3 years older than me, he was having a birthday. And I remember as clearly as anything that all of his friends were at our house. And they were making a big do over him, and they brought him all of these presents, and they sang to him. And I remember, as a little 5, 6-year-old boy, I remember going in the other room and sitting down on the fireplace and pouting and throwing a temper tantrum because Dave was getting all the attention and I wasn't getting anything. Well, it wasn't my birthday. It wasn't supposed to be about me. The attention was supposed to be on him because it was an event that was being held in his honor, not my honor. But we come to church, you see. See, we don't think of it that way, that when we come to church, this is an event that is being held in his honor, and he's supposed to be the one who's getting all the attention, not we ourselves. Now listen, back when I traveled all over the state as a state missionary and went to all these different churches week after week after week, there's some great churches out there who have wonderful songs they sing and gifted worship leaders, but sometimes worship leaders get mixed up. And it was one of these modern worship songs, and the phrase, and I'm not making this up, the phrase was more of you and less of me, Jesus. And they were singing that over and over again. What a good song. More of you and less of me, Jesus. And literally, not his fault, just a slip of the tongue, but the worship leader is up there and he's singing the exact opposite of that. And not just once, he's doubling down on it. More of me and less of you, Jesus. More of me and less of you, Jesus. That was probably, perhaps, the truest thing that was spoken in church that Sunday. Because that's really how worship comes across sometimes, right? You know, on Sunday, do you like, think about average Sunday. And I'm talking to preachers and all of us. You like the suit I'm wearing? How about the sermon? Do you like that sermon? Do you like those songs we picked out to sing? Did you enjoy my solo? But you know what I mean? That's always the danger when we come to church. Is that we're going to make somebody the attraction, or somebody is going to want to be the attraction, and it's always something that the preacher and all of us have to be on guard against, because when we come to church, when we come to worship, it is an event in which God is the guest of honor, and yet for most of us, we come to church, we forget about that, and it's about the people who are around us, and it's about enjoying a performance that is taking place on a stage, and then we leave out of here and we don't even realize perhaps how insensitive we have been to God. It's like we had a party in his honor and then ignored him. I'm not a small group guy. I have a hard time I enjoy crowds. Setting me in the middle of a stadium, I'm great. Setting me at the dinner table or one-on-one conversations, I'm great. But get me at with 10 or 12 people sitting around me, and I get kind of confused and turned around. A couple years ago, it was wonderful. Had a little birthday party for me. And went out to a restaurant, and I was sitting there at the table, and it wasn't long before I realized I think my birthday was just a good excuse for some people to have a party. Because there's like 3 conversations going on, and I'm enjoying just kind of listening in on one for a few minutes and listening in on one for a few minutes. Nobody's talking to me. Like I'm just sitting there eating my fried ice cream when they finally brought it out. Yeah. But that surely must be how God feels some Sundays when we have these nice parties in his honor, and yet really we're talking to everybody and about everything except for him. So worship is important. We got to get it right. So let's look. I want to say 7 things about worship, and they're all going to start with letter P, and it's going to be all over the scriptures, okay? But the first thing I want to talk about the person we worship. The person that we worship. I'm not going to spend long on this point, but we need to know this. Otherwise, it's idolatry. All right, so when Jesus is being tempted in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 10, remember what he says to Satan? He says, worship the Lord your God and him only. So we got to make sure that we're worshiping the right person. Not going to get off on this for long, not on this tangent for long, but here's a true story from church history. Henry Ward Beecher was he was a big deal in the 1800s. Pastored a big church in Brooklyn, New York called Plymouth Church. And people, kind of like Charles Spurgeon, people just come from all around because they wanted to hear. He was a wonderful speaker, and they wanted to hear him speak. Henry Ward Beecher. And so people would come just to hear him. And so what happened, though, is one Sunday in particular, Henry Beecher was not there. And back in those days, when the service began, all of the ministers would kind of parade in, and of course they all sat on the platform. And so as the service was beginning and the ministers paraded in and took their seats, it immediately was obvious that Henry Beecher was not there. He was not going to be there that day. Somebody else would be preaching that day. And so people began to just real quietly kind of get up, gonna slip out, because the reason why they came, they were let down. Well, the guest minister got up and he said, as we begin, let me make it clear that if you've come today to worship Henry Beecher, you may certainly be excused. But if you came today to worship God, please remain seated as we begin. Just real shamefully. By the way, I'm going to have to try to hit a few things and clarify a few things, okay? What happens that we don't, I understand why we do this, but language means something. It's not the preaching service. Preaching is a part of worship, but it's not the preaching service. And everything that comes before preaching is not the preliminaries. And I hate it. I hate it that we kind of rush the offering at the end. And I'm guilty of doing that. But that is a part of worship. And listen, I give my tithes online. I don't place a check or cash in the offering plate, but yet still, when the offering plate is being passed and we have that time carved out to receive the offering, it is still an act of worship in which I prayerfully consecrate what I gave online to the Lord. All of that is worship. And don't minimize the music, don't minimize the offering, don't minimize those things or downplay those things, or don't think that worship is just music, because worship is not just music. Worship is everything that we do when we convene here on Sunday mornings. And so, who are we worshiping? Well, let's just look real quick. Let me tell you two scriptures over in Revelation chapter 4 and Revelation chapter 5, because what better place to look at who we are worshiping than how they're worshiping him in heaven. And so we get a sneak preview of how worship is taking place in heaven in Revelation chapters 4 and 5. And here's the person whom they are worshiping. I want you to just listen to how it goes. I'm gonna pick verses, Revelation chapter 4, verse 10 through 11. It says they fall down and they worship him who lives forever and ever, and they cast their crowns before the throne, saying, here's worship in heaven, Revelation chapter 4, verse 11. They're not strutting around with a bunch of crowns piled on top of their heads. Look at me. That they've humbled themselves, and they've said everything good about me is only because of you, and they've cast their crowns at Jesus' throne. Verse 11 says they say this: worthy are you, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. So again, we are worshiping God because he is the creator God. But look in Revelation chapter 5 now and verse number 9. We worship God because he has created all things, and by his will everything exists. But Revelation 5:9 takes it a step further, and it says, and they sang a new song. And I do like that. And I like the old songs too. What I don't like is the people, I don't like those new songs. I think we ought to only sing the old songs. Well, you're not going to like heaven very much. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals. Here's why they're worshiping. Here's what they're singing, Revelation 5, verse 9. For you are slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. So we worship the Creator, we worship the Savior, we worship the slain, crucified Jesus, whose blood was shed on the cross that he might save people of all ethnicities and languages. What does worship look like? Well, I got a couple things worship looks like. Just give you one right now. And I can't say it. I know I'm talking in circles. And my heart is full of what I want to say, and I can't put it in just the right package to say it. But Isaiah chapter 6. This might be the most perfect picture of worship. And by the way, I like lots of different expressions of worship. I'm not hung up. I understand why churches have a modern, contemporary model. I understand why churches have a very formal, liturgical model. I understand why churches have a revivalistic, warm-hearted spirit. I understand the different expressions of worship, and I believe there's a place for all of those things, and it all fits together. But listen to Isaiah chapter 6. I think what we are missing, though, sometimes in modern culture is a sense of reverence. No matter, if you're seeker sensitive and modern and contemporary, there's still somewhere along the way, there has to be that sense of the sacred. And you have that in Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting. And all this is important, right? He's not pacing back and forth, wringing his hands. What are we going to do? The king has died. There's political uproar and turmoil. No. He's not pacing and fretting. He's seated on his throne, high and lifted up. And the train of his robe filled the temple. Verse 2 speaks of the seraphim angels. And verse 3 says, and one called to another and said, holy, holy, holy. Means completely different. You want to know what God is? He is completely different. Look in verse 4. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called. And I like this. And the house was filled with smoke. Talk about holy smoke. It was there that day. So in worship, there's this holy God who is completely other than, who is completely different from. And so we've always got to approach him with this sense of reverential fear and of sacredness. I'm not saying that we're not supposed to enjoy worship, or there's not supposed to be some levity to it. But I'm simply saying there's always got to be that respect for whose presence it is we have come to, the Creator, the one who was slain, and by whose blood he has ransomed us. So we're gonna have to stop there because it's almost 7:10. But I'm gonna pick up there, and we're gonna continue talking about worship in weeks to come. So thank you for joining.